Harley Manning here. Time to talk about how we at Forrester approach the impact or the intersection of customer experience and financials. So we start with our customer experience index, which is a little different from most measures of customer experience quality. It's literally a measure of how successfully a company delivers customer experiences that create and sustain loyalty, specifically customer loyalty. So the way that this works is we field a large-scale survey to thousands of consumers around the world, and that survey is kind of in two parts. The first part asks them about the customer experience quality that they perceive with brands they do business with. And we ask the customers, so how effective was the brand? In other words, did the experience deliver value to you? We ask them about ease because we're trying to get at whether or not it's difficult for customers to get value. And then we ask them questions about emotion, starting with sentiment. You know, did the brand make you feel good? Did interacting with the brand make you feel bad? And then we drill down into those emotions. But we don't stop there. We also ask about customer loyalty intentions. So we ask those same people, okay, so what's your retention likelihood? I mean, we don't ask it that way. We ask them, well, how likely are you to keep your business with this company, or are you going to switch to a competitor? We ask them about enrichment, in other words, whether or not they intend to buy more from this company. And we ask them about advocacy, whether or not they intend to recommend that company. So that's the elements of the index. We take the answers that come back from the consumers, we put them through a proprietary algorithm, and we spit out the CX index score that's between 0 and 100. Now, that's a lot of stuff, but there is a key takeaway here. And the key takeaway from what I just said is that when customer experience quality rises, customer loyalty intentions rise along with them. It's as straight a correlation as you can get. So what this means is that when your customer experience quality goes up, customers plan to stay with you longer, customers plan to buy more from you, customers plan to recommend you, and those are all things that you can monetize. And you can see this play out in the real world. This isn't just a hypothetical model. So what I want to do is show you the results of another study that we did, and it compares two companies in the same industry that are direct competitors. One is very well known for good customer experience. For example, Southwest Airlines. So here's a story that was just in the news within the last week. Southwest pilot surprises 1 millionth passenger with gifts, cash. Now, this pilot whose back you see right here, he was a former Air Force pilot, and now he's been flying with Southwest for years. And this guy took it upon himself to track how many Southwest passengers he had flown. And he calculated when he was flying his 1 millionth passenger and who she was. And so then he comes out, he gets on the PA system, he tells the entire group of passengers what he's doing, and that he names his 1 millionth passenger, and he walks over to her and he gives her a bottle of champagne and an envelope with a cash refund for the full price of her ticket. Why? Because that's what a Southwest employee feels empowered to do. You know, he didn't ask for permission, he just did it. Now, in contrast, one of Southwest competitors has been in the news quite a bit lately. I'm sure you've seen those stories.
I can't imagine who that will be, Harley.
Yeah, I can't either, but I'm sure I'm sure the audience knows exactly who I'm talking about. So the thing is that this kind of incident that happened with United, there I gave it away, was not super surprising, because Southwest has been doing very well in our CX index, and United has been doing very poorly, and that's been going on for years. So we actually have done a study, which we've run 2 years now, where we compared the compound annual growth rates of the revenue for direct competitors. And in this case, these are the airline competitors. And we did this from 2010 to 2015. Southwest Airlines, as I said, they've been pretty much #1 or #2 and our CX index for airlines during this entire period, and United has been ranked at the bottom of the major airlines during this period. And so the question was for this study, does that kind of experience that we just saw examples of, does that actually have a material impact on the economics of the business? And I'm sure that you saw with the United story speculation that, well, this probably won't cause them to be bothered. They don't need to make any changes. Well, let me show you. Turns out that if you compare the domestic revenue of these two airlines, and they're roughly the same size in terms of their domestic business, over the last 5 years, Southwest had a compound annual growth rate of 6.9% in its domestic revenues, and United's domestic revenues, they're consumer-driven domestic revenues, so money coming to them from passengers, like that guy who got dragged off the plane, they have shrunk. Now, if you look at all their revenues, the global revenues, and you compare the two airlines, the story is slightly better for United. They have experienced some growth outside of the country, but Southwest has been growing even more. And there's one more metric that airlines like. It's a metric that's really only used in that industry as far as I can tell, which is called revenue passenger miles. And this is literally a measure of how many miles the airlines fly that are paid for by passengers. So it's a really interesting look at the revenue impact of customers, consumers like you and me. And guess what? During this time period, Southwest grew and United shrank noticeably. So when you put this all together, what you see, especially when you look at the many other industries we've looked at, and you see exactly the same pattern, it's that at the macro level, companies that have superior customer experience outperform their direct competitors who have inferior customer experience on the very important metric of revenue growth, which I think pretty much every company cares about it, and most companies care about it a lot. So,
hey Harley, you know, I thought this was such a compelling example, and the thing that's a little surprising, a little frustrating, is that United has actually known for years from various indicators that they scored poorly on customer experience, whether it was the Forrester index or other ones like the American Customer Satisfaction Index, etc. And Southwest entered the market and took it by storm. Any explanation as to what went on there?
So that's a great question, because Southwest, so keep in mind that Southwest was founded on a sort of a vision of customer centricity or even customer obsession. They've always had this clear picture in their minds of the kind of experience they wanted to deliver, the kind of personality that they wanted to have. And you can even see it when you go to their website and you look at the part where they have job listings and such, and they talk about who they are. They very much are looking for people who want to serve, who have, as they put it, a servant's heart. And so this has been from the get-go with Southwest. This is how they succeeded. This is how they grew from a small regional airline to the nation's largest, yes, that's right, the largest domestic air carrier. And in fact, last year, 2016, marked their 44th consecutive year of profitability. So they've been customer-centric from the get-go, and they've been successful from the get-go. United, on the other hand, is a legacy airline, and for years and years, they competed, and for many of those years very successfully, by which routes they had, for example, and other factors besides being customer-centric. And so as economic pressures hit the airline industry, United, I believe, fundamentally failed to grasp the direct correlation between customer experience and their economic success. And so they didn't put the kind of focus on customer experience that Southwest did. In fact, United, I'm quite convinced from talking to people there for research, is not, they don't even really think of customer experience as a top priority, or they may now, they very well may now, but they didn't. They thought it was something that they had to pay attention to, but they were just, their mindset really was very much fixated on some of the old ways of competing. You know, be on time, keep the right routes, keep your plane capacity balanced. You know, in other words, fill those planes, the capacity, So it's really a mind shift. I do believe, though, based on the announcements that they made, that were made by their CEO, I think it's very hopeful. I think that it's finally the connection between CX and economics has now got an exclamation point after it, and I do believe that they'll be paying attention. So let's talk about some highlights from the U.S. CX Index for 2016, and that's going to then take us into some little case studies. So a couple highlights. First is that we rated 319 brands across a number of industries. We also actually rated some U.S. federal government agencies, which is quite interesting. 58 brands had statistically significant year-over-year improvements where, a data scientist could look at it and say, yep, that was truly an improvement. That's not just noise. Just 28 brands rose 5 points or more, though. So the kind of rise that you would really notice as a customer. And 3 of those brands are Cricket Wireless, Econo Lodge, and PetSmart. Now, we reached out, a couple of our analysts, and tried to interview, and in many cases did interview, companies among those 28 that had the significant rise. And then we wrote a case study that included these 3 and some others. But I wanted to zero in on these 3 because, among other things, they have multiple locations. And those locations are very important to them. And so I think this will make them somewhat more relevant to what Cheryl's going to talk about than perhaps some other examples I might have touched on. So let's start.
And Harley, I just have a question on methodology. You mentioned that the CX is a 100-point scale. So those who improved by 5 points might have gone from 50 to 55 or 80 to 85. So it's that movement that we're looking at. Is that right?
Yes, and thank you for that, because I should have said, and shame on me, I didn't say. What I should have said is, I'm not holding up these 3 brands as great exemplars of customer experience. They're okay. What I am holding them up as is examples of brands that said, we want to get better, and they took very specific actions, and they got better as measured by the index. If we were talking about the top brands in terms of customer experience, we'd be talking about Southwest, we'd be talking about USAA and financial services, we'd be talking about Nordstrom and retailers. But these are brands that we can learn some very important lessons from. So their absolute level in the customer experience index, kind of less interesting than the fact that they rose. So thanks for triggering me to point that out. So let's start with Cricket Wireless. Couple things that they did. One is they now have ultra-simple plans to guarantee pricing transparency. And pricing transparency is huge in terms of the perceived experience. And they made in-store customers feel valued. And one thing I will tell you that in the CX Index, when we look at drivers of high-quality experiences, you cannot go wrong making your customers feel valued. Every customer wants to feel valued, and when they do, it makes their overall perceived experience go up. So let's just dive into Cricket. Here are those plans I talked about. 4 of them, that's it. 4, a $30 plan, a $40 plan, a $50 plan, and a $60 plan. And if you go to their website, which is where I grabbed this image from, they lay what you get for each of those plans in a very simple grid. The perceived clarity of this, I can tell you, translates directly into trust in the brand. When your customers, and this is pure data science, it's as clear can be, when you communicate in jargon, when you communicate unclearly to your customers, they think you're trying to cheat them. So clear communication is the reverse of that. It builds trust, and that's what Cricket does here. So this is not surprising at all that this made their score go up. In their stores, now their stores are nothing to look at. They're fairly simple. This is a discount brand, but the insight that Cricket had was, look, just because we sell discounted phone service, we don't have to treat our customers like it's discounted phone service. We can treat them well, and so they created these guidelines for their employees and trained their employees to do very specific things. The guidelines fell under 3 different headings: make an impression, make a friend, make a match. So under things like make an impression, warmly welcome the customer, look them in the eye, smile, and then uncover their needs. Ask them, what do you want? Make a friend. Thank them for their business and be sincere about it, and thoroughly educate the customer. Don't try and snow them. Don't try and sell them the wrong thing. Educate them on what's available, and then make a match by personalizing that solution. Make sure that out of those 4 solutions, they get the one that's just right for them, and gain agreement. So important. Get them to, and wait for them to say, yep, I agree, that is the right plan for me. And these are all high leverage things that you can do with your employees. Now let's look at Econo Lodge, which is a Choice Hotels brand, which I bring up because some of the images I'm going to show you say Choice on them, and I didn't want to confuse you. So there are 2 big things I want to highlight that they did. The first is that they made it easier to use loyalty points, and they created an owner's council to identify top performing properties. And let me tell you why both of those are good things. So first, let's look at the loyalty points issue. Now, Econo Lodge took the time to research and understand their customers, and they understand that their customers are not frequent business travelers like probably most of us on this webinar. They are people who travel a couple times a year, stay in an Econo Lodge a couple times a year, and it's because they're driving typically and they see an Econo Lodge, or maybe they knew where one was and they plan to stop there. So these are not people who are going to build up tons of loyalty points. So Econo Lodge said, let's make it easy for them to get a reward really quickly. So for example, you make, just as you can see on this, just 2 qualifying stays, and you get enough points to get a $50 gift card at one of these places that you see on the right. And that's fantastic. That's a fast reward. And sometimes when you check in, they'll even give you like a smaller gift card, just to like go get a cup of coffee at a Starbucks. So this is really important. It's really based on who their customers are and this idea of quickly rewarding the behavior that you want. I also talked about this Owners Council. The Owners Council has some real teeth, some real clout. They have conventions, and they pick the top performing properties of the year. And what's really interesting is that this year, for Econo Lodge, they picked this place out in Rochester, Minnesota. It's actually near the Mayo Clinic, interestingly. So you can imagine the emotional engagement that could be taking place in and around people who stay there. And what really impressed me was when I went to the site of this Econo Lodge, what I saw. And by the way, take a look at this picture for a second. If you're like me, you're going, okay, it looks nice, but it's no RitzCarlton, right? What's interesting is for these customers, it kind of is the Ritz. If you go to the site, you see the overall customer ratings that they give to this particular property. 4.8 on a 5-point scale, and that's based on 767 customer reviews. That says that Owners Council knows what's going on. This property is rocking, and I would encourage you to go to their site and read some of the reviews. It's super clear what they're doing and why they're delivering a great experience. So it's surfacing these kinds of examples to your broader base of franchisees so that they can see, so that's the right thing to do. That helps clarify in all of your employees and partners' minds what it is that they should be doing, as opposed to them taking a random walk.
And then Harley, in these 2 examples, if you'll go back one slide for me, sorry, I just wanted to comment. I think it's really interesting with Cricket that they have both things that they've done at the brand level, which is their pricing transparency, and things they've done at the in-location level where they're really looking at what does the experience need to be when a person comes inside the store. In Econo Lodge, you're seeing similar, I think, with you've got them thinking about how do I engage across channels with this mobile app, which is a brand level initiative. And then it's very interesting that they're looking at their overall rating from their customer reviews, but they're also so public about the hotel summary of what guests actually experience when they go inside a specific location, like room comfort, cleanliness, value, the staff service of facilities, was the Wi-Fi up and running. It's interesting that they're looking at many different touch points in order to know how they're serving their customers.
Yeah, and the way they clearly communicated is another example of building trust through this kind of transparency. So, you know, it's a risk in case the reviews aren't so good, but the reality of the situation is you don't want to conceal that from your business. You want to get that front and center and fix it, and you know, don't try to spin people. Try to actually deliver a great experience. And yeah, your point about the multiple touch points, digital is so very important these days, whereas it wasn't when I was starting out my career. But you know what? Molecules still matter too, just like bits do. And when you've got these multi-location types of businesses, you darn well better deliver in the physical world and not just the digital world. And make sure that the two things complement each other, as they obviously do here. So now let's talk PetSmart for just a moment. They did two things. Well, actually, they did more than two things, but I'm sure you realize I'm just picking two. So they created a lifestyle app that offers personalized advice for pet owners, which I thought was very clever. And they doubled the number of in-store events to educate pet owners. So gave them a reason to go to those physical locations. So first, let's look at this lifestyle app. You know, warning, these pictures are adorable. So here are a couple of screenshots. You can see these on the Amazon store, or you might want to download the app for yourself. But first is book or reserve a spa day, play date, sleepover, or training class. So that's real customer engagement. That's saying, yeah, we're not just selling you pet food, we're living the pet lifestyle. And then, even more impressive to me is the one on the right. Discover pet-friendly places wherever you are. So now PetSmart becomes a trusted resource for people traveling with their pets, as, for instance, one of my analysts is very prone to do. She's absolutely in love with her little Chihuahua, for example. And there are lots of people like that, people who feel like the pet is part of the family, and God bless them, and this app could very well become an indispensable resource for them. That, by the way, also binds them to PetSmart and makes them have a positive emotional engagement. And the cool thing is when you drill down, the pictures are even cuter. I just want to smooch this little guy's face off.
Harley, do you have a dog?
You know, I grew up with dogs. Right now I have a cat because we travel so much, but I still do love dogs. And I'm prone to stopping dog owners as they try to walk by me and petting their dog so I can get my dog fix. So there you go. Yeah, I love dogs. Look at this. This one's so cute. Anyway, but yeah, so you go on your you go on your PetSmart app and you book a session for one of these in-store experiences like dog training, and it gives you a reason to go to the store and engage with the store. And while you're there, of course, you're just going to think, well, you know, of course I want the leash and I want the doggy treats and I want the other stuff. So it's good for PetSmart's business. It's good for the customer engagement, and it's built that strong emotional engagement that leads to the customer loyalty I talked about. So just want to recommend three things to leave you with, and then we'll go on to Cheryl's part of the presentation. First of all, find out what drives your CX-fueled revenue growth. It's different things. You know, for Cricket, the clarity of the plans. For PetSmart, it's engaging with people at an emotional level. You know, for Econo Lodge, it's having a clean, friendly place and making sure that people can pick the cleanest, friendliest place. So you got to know these things, because otherwise you could spend a lot of time doing stuff that might be nice, it might make you feel good, but it's not going to ring the cash register. Secondly, focus on creating employee behaviors that drive customer perceptions of a great experience. If you've got physical locations, most of you do, having that kind of clear guidance that we saw with Cricket, with that little wheel, if you remember that, so important. You know, don't just tell people be friendly to guests, say greet them with a handshake, look them in the eye, or whatever it is that you feel are part of your values, but just make that explicit, because it's really at the employee level, it's about behavior change. It's about how they behave, and specifically how they do it when you're not in the room to watch them. And then measure the impact of your efforts on an ongoing basis, because that tells you when you're succeeding and when you're not succeeding so well. It tells you what to keep doing, what to turn up the volume on, and what to stop doing or just do differently. And so with that, I am going to now turn things over to Cheryl by clicking on my WYSI control panel here. Okay, Cheryl, did that work for you?
I believe so. Thank you so much, Harley. And where I'm going to key off on is this continuous measurement and how one begins to do that. So as we walk through today, I want to start with just a little bit of an introduction to MarketForce and what we do. We measure operational experience and, operational excellence and customer experience for multi-location businesses. Our goal is to ensure that the brand standards are executed in every location and across all channels. We want to make sure that customers are delighted with their experience, and we want to reward the brand with their loyalty. When we are doing that, when we see customers who return and refer, we should see that you get a financial return, that something is happening, and that is exactly what Harley talked about when he said that he can see in the work that Forrester does in model, he can see changes in customer experience lead to changes in compound annual growth. At MarketForce, when we do modeling, we see the same sorts of things. You should be seeing a connection to that. And we know that this is not easy. Brands with hundreds or thousands of locations depend on those regional and location level operators. Sometimes they're fairly independent because they're franchisees. But we also know that the action of a few bad apples can impact the reputation for everyone, just like what happened with United. It was one flight, one incident, and became a PR nightmare. So delighting customers in this era of choice, and when you have many, many locations, it's not a small feat. However, we've also worked with customers ranging from Fortune 10 to emerging brands, and we've noticed that there are 5 best-in-class practices that help create the operational and customer experience that one is looking for. So let's take a look at what some of those best practices are. First and foremost, Harley spoke to this in many ways. It's the strategy. Does the corporation actually believe that customer experience matters, and are they executing on that? So you must ensure that the strategy is set and that the programs underneath are going to support that strategy. It does begin with culture. I think one thing that Harley had mentioned to me on a previous discussion was that it is harder to get a job at Southwest than it is to get into Harvard Business School because of the number of applicants and the screening process they use. That's culture, that's strategy, that's making sure across all touch points that you are able to drive the CX objective for the organization. A second piece to think about, we really advocate for rich data. You must look at your business through multiple lenses. The reason is very simple. Any methodology has pros and cons. So relying on a single metric or a single measurement system can create some risk for you, and you can be vulnerable to the biases in that methodology. So our best-in-class customers, those who are even mentioned in some of the work that Forrester does, they use these multiple lenses. And finally, a piece where I often see clients perhaps not having the right resources in place or the right thinking is the way in which they can leverage the gold in the data. You may be spending hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars collecting data about the customer experience, and it is incredibly important that you leverage that data asset, mine it for gold, and understand what the brand, the operators can do to capture every opportunity there is to improve loyalty and revenue and lower costs. So having that insights team in place or outsourcing that is also a best practice. Technology, we hear from clients all the time that they want a single pane of glass. So being able to get data onto that single pane of glass so you can see across data streams and minimize the confusion, the administrative overhead, the time that it takes to bring data together, that is something to be looking for as well as a best practice. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about this, And I think some of the examples that Harley raised for Cricket, for Econo Lodge, etc., is really important. These companies set goals. They said, we're going to improve. They made a 5-point improvement, and it took that commitment to make that happen. So this is important for companies. It's how you get away from the lip service of saying, we are great at customer experience, and you actually have to make it happen. So it's the hardest part of all, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to make that happen. One of the things you'll start with is making it clear what your strategy is and beginning to make that run across every component of the business. With Cricut it is, we're going to have not only pricing transparency, but we are going to create a great customer experience in store, and everyone has this diagram that says, make an impression, make a match, make a friend. Okay, very important for that. In another case, DoubleTree by Hilton, on their website, and very much when you talk with them, work with them, they absolutely are focused on their care program. Create a rewarding experience. It's really important to them, and it runs through their entire culture. I saw a great story on CNN actually about Ashley Stewart and how the brand has changed the culture to focus on the customer's needs. Ashley Stewart carries a lot of plus sizes, and as they talked with customers, those customers wanted to be beautiful, fashionable. They wanted to have a great experience in the store. And one of the things they talk about is first be her friend. So the store knows what that means. They're very clear on the model that they need to use and can take that forward. And then finally, you'll see the Circle of Life Power-Up Rewards, where there's a focus at GameStop on trades, on pre-owned games, and on the new releases as well, and the experiences they create around all of those things. These are strategies, top-line things that then need to roll into measurement systems. When you think about this, I'm going to really talk about 3 questions that often come up when we're consulting with our clients about what to design in a measurement system. First of all, how do you create that system? Second, importantly, once you've made your bet and you've said, these are the things we need to do, how do you verify that these are the right behaviors to create loyal customers and really extends to the financial impact? And then finally, the last question is, how can the brand focus locations on driving improvement, particularly in multi-location businesses? We're going to talk about that channel particularly. One of the things that I talked about was multiple data streams, and I want to talk about a little bit about the difference between objectively assessing performance and subjectively assessing performance. In the Cricut wireless example that Harley referred to, there are very specific expectations about what those mean. What does it mean to say that you're going to greet someone warmly? What is the brand standard that is going to be used to train thousands and thousands of people who are in those locations exactly what the process is, how they are to behave? If they don't have that training, they can't execute. We know that many companies spend millions of dollars. Literally, we have one large wireless client who spends millions of dollars on a Miller Heiman training program. Those dollars had better be have a high ROI, because you want to make sure that A, you're measuring the right thing, and B, it's being executed. Audit, mystery shopping, beacon data, other things like that can be that objective assessment. Subjective assessments are coming from your customers, and they're saying, hey, when you greeted me warmly and you did all these things, did it really feel like you cared about me and I was a valued customer? Did it really feel like there was pricing transparency? Did you really create trust with me? Okay, those two are important. So when we think about the difference between the two, a couple of tips as you are designing your programs, thinking about how they dovetail together. Objective data is very detailed. There is If you go into a wireless store and they are supposed to show you your coverage and they do not, that is something you need to understand, because we know through modeling with different wireless companies that if you do not show the coverage map and people do not understand what their first bill will be, there is a much higher churn rate within the first 30 days. Now, a client, a customer, will never stand for going through a detailed questionnaire that asks, did we show you the coverage map? Did we walk through the billing process with you? Did we show you an Apple versus a Samsung phone? They're not going to do that. So that compliance with brand standards, are you doing what we asked you to do? Are you protecting our brand against regulatory statutes? All of that has to be in these objective questionnaires. The other thing that we suggest that you do, and this relates to some of the things that Harley talked about, and particularly for the Cricket piece, is the sales efficacy model. Are you asking needs-based questions? How do you do that and not sound like a used car salesman? Are you making sure that you are giving recommendations that comply with those needs, and are you trying to close the sale? Again, the customer's not going to tell you that. And then finally, there's all kinds of things that can help you with marketing execution. Are the POPs materials out there? Are the right promotional materials out there, etc.? With our customers, they want something brief. We know that there are declining response rates in the survey world. And so we want to have brief and very targeted and very important questions that get at exactly what you need to know. People are going to tell you about their impressions, about their emotion, about satisfaction, about loyalty. It's some of the engagement pieces that Harley talked about. They will talk about those staff members. And very, very, very important is to talk about their problem experience. Are there locations in your business that have a much higher problem experience rate than others? Are your staff enabled and equipped to answer problems that come up? I don't know about you, Harley, if you've ever encountered a great problem experience resolution or a poor one, but I was at a grocery store where I shop, and a customer had gone up to the register and he had expired coupons. And the cashier was explaining, I cannot take those coupons, they're expired. She actually cannot. Perhaps she could be fired for doing that. I don't know their policy. But instead of walking him over to the customer service desk in a very, very busy grocery store where there were 5 to 6 people in line at each register, she chose to argue with him. He chose to argue with her. And so she took down an entire line, and everyone watched this poor experience happening. Was she trained and equipped on what to do in that case? Was she told, if you cannot resolve this in less than 30 seconds or less than 1 minute, abandon ship, take them to the customer experience desk or the customer service desk, come back and get the line moving again? Those are things that corporations have to be really well aware of.
Yeah, and you know,
how about you, Harley? Any great or bad experiences that you've had lately?
Oh yeah, so many. But the thing I wanted to point out is that I love the model. I love the 3-part model. We would agree 100% with that. What's so well illustrated by that story you just told, though, is if you ask the customer what happened, you probably wouldn't get the complete picture. So you need that subjective piece of information, but you also need the objective information of what actually did happen, and you need to understand the financial impact. And when you put those 3 things together, I mean, just imagine, what the financial impact of that cashier not being able to take those expired coupons was, and then arguing on terms of that customer's loyalty, in terms of the other customers who were also all having to wait and listen to this, who had to see that company at its worst, versus having a policy and training that would have resolved that situation seamlessly in a way that made everybody feel as good as they could possibly be made to feel. It just doesn't make economic sense to do those kinds of things, to have your people arguing with your customers out in public. It makes no economic sense whatsoever. And so when you have a framework that captures all 3 of those elements and put it together, and often it's the economics piece the financial impact, that's the missing piece, and that's the piece that unfortunately needs to be there because that's the one that convinces the executives to take action. So I love your story and your framework.
Thanks so much for that. So when there's a couple of other points in point 2 really that I would like for everybody listening in to understand, and that is that I see a shortcoming in the industry, a pitfall, where customers spend a lot of time collecting data but not enough time getting to the insights. And there are 2 things that I would like for you to think about, which is, 1, how do different data streams act together? And what can those data streams tell you if you are looking at them together and not in silos? We often speak with clients who are looking at each separate data set. They're looking at surveys in one place, contact center complaints in another, mystery shopping or audits in another, and yet the 3 together can tell a really beautiful story that can help you set benchmarks, strategy, execution guidelines if you put the data together. The second thing is make sure that you have some idea of how to tie to your financial metrics. So let's take a look at what that looks like. On this next slide, I think it's a really illustrative of how the data streams come together and decisions you can make. So on the bottom for this particular client are deciles of performance on mystery shop. The mystery shopping program is to assess compliance with brand standards. Do you do the things that we have trained you on and asked you to do? And you'll notice that we've split this into 10 buckets. So let's assume this is about 1,000 locations. So each bucket has about 100 locations in it, and we're aggregating data. So we're aggregating many, many shops. And you can see that we have then plotted against that overall satisfaction of the customer and their likelihood to recommend, and we've plotted against that problem experience. Notice that there's not very much good things happening until you get to the 6th decile, right here. And at that point in time, the data starts to diverge, and you see higher and higher customer satisfaction ratings and recommendation ratings, and you see lower problem response ratings. And part of the nice thing about these trends is that you can see exactly where you need to start to say, we have to be at least at this level on execution to brand standards in order to lower our cost of service for complaint or to increase our loyalty over time. So, and you will also know exactly what the score is. Perhaps it's 85%, perhaps it's 90%, perhaps it's 70%. That can become your benchmark. So very important to think about, and we'll talk about in the 3rd question answer how that works.
Yeah, and as you know,
go ahead.
You know, I love that chart. I absolutely love that chart. That you could run your business off of that chart, because we often get asked, well, you know, how good should we be? Well, you know, if you're looking at this chart, it's pretty clear what you need to do, right? It's pretty clear you need to go to the people in the 1st decile and do something about them, even if it means shutting them down. And you need to try and get everybody else up to at least that 7th decile, at least. And you can show them this and have them relate that to money in their pockets, which is highly motivating. So, I mean, this is just such a crystal clear connection between get rid of the things that cause problems and do the things that are going to increase satisfaction. And guess what? Your loyalty will go up. You know, you'd have to be blind to not get it from this. So I love this. Everybody, I think, should probably take a screenshot of this and put it up in their office.
You are such a data geek, and so am I. But it's wonderful what the data scientists can help you understand and figure out from the data. And we'll talk about how we take this forward. And then as you look at the financial piece, one of the things that you can do is really clarify what this means to the brand, to the operators, how they put money in their pockets. We do a great deal of modeling to take CX data of different types and put it against a metric that matters So Harley talked about revenue passenger miles in the airline industry. In the petro-convenience industry, it's gas sold. So in this case, we did models using mystery shopping data, actually, and we identified 5 critical drivers that lifted the gallons sold, and this normalized the data for things like the number of pumps at the site, or whether they had a convenience store, whether it's suburban or urban. It normalizes the data, so this is above and beyond those capital investments in the sites. And what you see is as you execute on those drivers, you get a lift. Those stores or those locations who executed on 0 of those drivers sold about 36,000, 37,000 gallons per month. Those who are in the top area, you can see, scored almost double that at 78,000 gallons per month. Now, the opportunity for the business is there's lots of people who do not do well on those drivers. So their goal is going to be to improve on those drivers. It's very specific, it's very measurable. And you have a group over here who perform on most of them quite well, better than the average of the system or the median of the system. Okay? So this type of output is what is going to justify your investment in CX above and beyond the normal. We don't want PR issues. We want to have our customers speaking about us well, but this is also going to help people understand that it means money in their pockets when you're trying to get past the lip service. Okay. Another thing that I do want you to think about is driving change at the location level. Very important. We have walked into many a brand where they have never seen data broken out except at the brand level. This particular diagram is a distribution chart. It's fairly simple, but you have to remember to do it. And it's really important because it's highly valuable to see how my organization is performing against whatever CMX metric there is. The wider the distribution, the more inconsistent your brand is in its execution. You want to make sure also that you don't see a curve that has a very, very long tail to the left, which means that you have any number of sites that are impacting your brand reputation and they're not executing to the standards that you expect. So once you have done this, you can then set a target and say, hey, we want to be at least 65% on NPS, our top box loyalty score, our customer effort level score, whatever your metric is. And we need every group of these locations to set a benchmark for change. Just as Harley talked about a 5-point change over time for 3 brands that he studied, we want to see, can these folks move and be like these folks, a 10% increase over the next 6 months? And they get real targets, real goals they have to execute. In this petro-convenience study, we were able to identify a number of locations who had consistently improved their performance on the critical drivers that we identified that made a difference in financial performance. When Harley said at the beginning, there were a smaller number of companies who actually drove change. We know it's hard. It's really hard to get consistent change. So in fact, out of the 1,800 or so who were identified as underperforming against the brand's median or average performance, 22% drove change. So 1 in 5 actually consistently made the changes that they needed to. It's hard work. But when they did, as you can see, they've improved. They did see money in their pocket. Their average fuel sales growth was 12.5% year over year compared to that for the system. And so it's almost double, just about what we'd predicted. The median fuel sales growth was 1.6x from 2% to 3.2%. It works if you drive the change, but it takes the will of the organization behind it to absolutely make it happen. Any comments on that, Harley, as we finish up here and look for questions?
Yeah, driving change, as you point out, is in fact hard. In fact, there's an old Dilbert cartoon I love. Dilbert says, "Change is good. You go first." And yeah, well, it encapsulates it. Asking someone to change, you have to show them what's in it for them and show them specifically what to do. But you can do it. You can drive change. There's a great book called Switch by the Heath brothers, Chip and Dan, that goes into this. We've written reports on it. It's really what behavioral economics is about. But what it comes down to is a chart like this that says, look, it's worth it. This is so worth it. And so if you get to this point where you can see that it's worth it, that will motivate you as someone running a company to do the work to figure out how to drive the change. So Cheryl, I think you might be muted.
So thank you for that, Harley. Sorry. So to drive change at the location level, let me summarize. First, it's important to put together a coaching team that helps the team set their goals and how they're to change it, emphasizes the corporation's focus on customers. That focus, that DNA, that this is not lip service, we mean it, needs to start at the top. And how that executes from strategy is going to involve everything from like what Southwest does on who we choose to hire to how you are trained to handle problems. It's something that's large, and the coaching team and your internal coaching team to help that happen or outsourcing that is going to be really important. The second thing to consider is create a success playbook. And if you can automate that online, even better, because you want people to have what are your goals, how do we track that you're making change, and what are you getting for that investment of your time and money. You must hold operators accountable. They have to create those action plans, and they have to have a specific results that they are to achieve. So incremental improvements against relative goals, and it has to be mandatory. It is not an option to sit and not move the needle day after day, month after month, year after year. It has to be mandatory. We actually have one CEO, or excuse me, a COO of a restaurant company, and every year he changes the standards and the expectations. All of the operators, franchisees, or corporate owned, call him up every year and say, wait, it's really hard to meet these goals. You've changed the needle again. You've moved my my cheese, whatever the phrase is. And his answer is, yes, now let's get it done. That's making it happen for the entire organization and saying this is so important to us. And then finally, you must communicate, communicate, communicate. One of the things that I think our clients find frustrating is that folks who run these multi-location businesses have high turnover. The person you trained last month may not be there this month. So the communication process from corporate down to region, down to franchisees or operators, to the independent insurance company, franchisors, all of this is important so they continue to hear and understand and be trained of why this matters to them. Well, with that, folks, I'm going to close us out. Harley, thank you so much. It's an incredible pleasure to work with you again, and such tremendous insights from Forrester.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation and some of the stuff that you shared.
All right. We'll talk to everyone soon. Thank you.
Thank you.